Hello students, Mr. Yund here, working from home, working in the basement. Today is Chapter 15, Lesson 1. So today's lesson begins with a large religious event called the Second Great Awakening. It could be described as a wave of religious interest. In this wave, got people thinking about ways to change things for the better. Today's lesson, all about reform. So during the Second Great Awakening, people would travel long distances to partake in religious services known as revivals. When was the First Great Awakening? This happened in mid 1700s, so like 100 years before the United States was even a country. So now we're at 1800s, Second Great Awakening, and these revivals are big. People travel a long way to hear these preachers preach. At these revivals, there would, of course, be preaching. There'd be singing. There'd be praying. There'd be hymns. There'd be weeping. There'd be people collapsing and whatnot. History tells us these were big events, big religious events, spurred a lot of religious fervor. So among this religious awakening, some people thought to form their own utopias. So people are like, hey, I'm really into this religion thing now. We should make our own community based on these ideas. A utopia is defined as a perfect society. So people would go off to form their own utopias. It usually ended up as a weird, like, commune with unrealistic expectations. Regardless, most of the planned utopias failed. We remember learning about the Mormons, however. They went off to go form their own utopia in Utah. And while not perfect, they did manage to form successful long-term communities. Heck, they're still there today. Salt Lake City area, a whole bunch of Mormons. Impact on religion. All of this talk of revival and reform got people to want to reform their own lives. Among these ideas was the idea of temperance. The temperance movement was mainly about limiting or banning alcohol. This Jewish idea was the brainchild of a Connecticut preacher named Lyman Beecher. It's your rhyme of the day. The movement used pamphlets, revival-like gatherings, and lectures to convince people that booze was immoral and wrong. Their efforts actually worked. In some states, like Maine, the manufacture and sales of booze was outlawed. Most of these bans, however, did not last long. So there's Lyman Beecher right there. Looks kind of like an update party pooper to Mr. Yund. So education. Education was tricky because there's all kinds of different beliefs on education. Some people liked the idea of mandatory education. Some people didn't like the idea of mandatory education because they thought that education should be a private family matter. A lot of people thought that women didn't need an education. Why would you teach a woman how to read and write? She doesn't really need to know how to read and write or do arithmetic or even, higher level education things when she's just going to have babies and be a housewife. Some people felt that way. Another issue of the day was, well, there's other people that aren't allowed to have education. For example, African Americans. We learned about in the South, they weren't even allowed to learn to read and write. All these things are hang-ups for the formal education system that we have today. Another big issue of that time was that teachers most often didn't have any education on, well, education. I feel like I got cheated. I had to go to college for 4 years. These guys didn't do any training. This kind of changed in 1839. Massachusetts opened its first, what's called a normal school, which taught people who had graduated high school how to teach others. It was basically the first school for teachers. The idea came from a guy named Horace Mann. He was a lawyer in Massachusetts. Other states soon picked up on Mann's idea and had normal schools of their own. In this time of reform, some colleges even started accepting non-traditional students. They started accepting women as students or African Americans as students, like Oberlin College in Ohio. Moving on to the disabled, there were a number of notable characters that sought to improve or educate those who were in some way handicapped. Thomas Galladay opened the Hartford School for the Deaf in 1817. There you go. At the same time, Louis Braille invented the Braille reading system. where the visually impaired could feel the letters to read them. Books were printed in Braille, thanks to a guy by the name of Samuel Howe. You can see Braille here. It's the little bumps, and they represent letters of the alphabet and numbers. Another reformer of the age was a school teacher named Dorothea Dix. Dix traveled to prisons in 1841, and what she found was terrible. Inmates were chained to the walls, with next to no clothing and unheated cells. Some had not even committed any crimes, they just had mental illnesses. She brought these problems into the public eye so that they could be reformed. Moving on quickly to culture changes, there were some thinkers of this time that stressed the importance of things like following your inner conscience. So not like the Bible, not the laws, following your inner conscience. What was right to you? What was right or wrong to you personally? And there was also these implications involving these connections between humans and nature. So like becoming one with nature and doing what you feel is right. And this way of thinking was called transcendentalism. Like you transcend society, essentially. They kind of didn't like mainstream society. It was really, this idea of transcendentalism was really pushed by a group of thinkers, people like Margaret Fuller, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Henry David Thoreau. Emerson, for example, urged people to listen to their inner voice, their inner conscience, to overcome prejudice. Thoreau practiced what we call civil disobedience, or not following laws that are felt unjust. Thoreau actually once went to jail rather than paying a tax that he knew would go to support the Mexican-American War. He didn't like the Mexican-American War. So things like that. This time, reform and improved arts really had American art and literature come into its own. It was this time when American artists and writers really stopped being like European artists and writers and really formed what became American art and American literature. Got a little picture of a transcendentalism here. The spiritual unity of all forms of being, with God, man, and nature all sharing the universal soul. Sort of this weird, I guess it doesn't sound that weird, but this new way of thought was pretty abstract at the time. On the next page, we have our quiz. Standard quiz, 10 points, 5 questions, all on the lesson. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, hey, have a great day.